We are in our fifth sermon, Pursuing Jesus in a World That Isn't. This has been a really interesting series for me to walk through and prepare for, because oftentimes when I immerse myself in the Word of God and I hold that in contrast to the general literature that is available today within Christendom, I find that most literature that's produced today, and I mean, we live in an interesting day and age. There is so much Christian literature being produced. Now, I'm for that. I'm not against it. I think it's a good thing. But I often find that much of the Christian literature that's produced is actually, not all, some of it, very much softens the intensity of the gospel. Not all, but some of it. And when I immerse myself purely in the Word for a season, especially when I'm doing like exegetical preaching, which is what we do here predominantly, I'm always amazed at the intensity of the writers in Scripture. I mean, they took their job really serious. They fully believed in it. It wasn't just like a country club where Christians got together, it wouldn't have been on Sundays back then, but where they gathered together on a regular basis and maybe just, hey, what's going on? Let's have a barbecue. They believed that heaven and earth hung on what they were doing. And Peter has a tendency to be even more passionate yet than some of his contemporaries. And his passion just isn't in holding us accountable. His passion is also in his call to us to proclaim hope. As a pastor, I have a really interesting job. I've been doing this since the fall of 1999 part-time. And as it's moved into full-time work and all these years of working with people, I often see people in the best of times and in the worst of times. I get to see this on a regular basis. I do get to go have coffee once in a while where it's just relaxed and what's going on and how's life. But most of the time when I'm with people, it's hanging on one of these two extremes. It's either a really great season that they're entering into, or it's a really, really difficult one. And I live in these polar opposite ends on a weekly basis. I get to sit down with engaged couples. It's fun, the best of times. And they're so excited about marriage and life. It's so optimistic. You ask them about their future, what they're going to do. So what do you guys have planned? Have you talked about kids? Some of those normal questions. And it's all seen with optimism. Nobody sits in the office and goes, I plan on having 4 miscarriages. It's always that optimism and the excitement, and it's fun. And then when I finish premarital counseling, often I walk out and there's joy in my heart as I drive home. Now, they really do believe in those early days that it's going to be fun all the time. So all of us married people, we just nod and smile. It's wonderful all the time. We were just talking a couple of weeks ago in the office about how in counseling, we find that regret is a common stage in marriage. And learning to handle that and deal with it. Interesting. But not in premarital counseling, man. None of that's there. It's all fun, optimism, excitement. It's not just that. I get to be with people too, like baby dedications, brand new life coming into the world. And it's so captivating, and it always fills me with joy. Oftentimes it'll bring me to tears when you watch mothers with brand new babies and dads hold their kids for the first time. The miracle of new life is awesome. I love that I get to do that with people. I love that I get to be a part of people's eternal birth too, like through baptism. We have baptisms often here. And there's something so beautiful and wonderful when you baptize somebody and you bring them back out of the water. I get to be right there and see the joy on their face. That's oftentimes why I cry during baptisms, because it's an amazing experience. To watch people taste hope, to watch people make that proclamation in front of everyone that Christ has their heart, their identity. Baptism is so beautiful, and to see that hope in people so close is a real blessing. But it's not just the best of times. I also see it as an honor to get a walk with people through the worst of times. I get to look into the eyes of people that are dying. I get to listen to them make final requests. It's so interesting to me how people can go years and years and years of not going to the church or pushing eternal issues aside or trying to not think about metaphysical things or be purely science alone. And there is nothing. I believe science does coincide. That's for a different sermon. But then, man, in those latter days when life is slipping away, when you are on your deathbed, it's amazing the lawyers and doctors and brilliant thinkers and people that have stood at distance from it. But on that deathbed, when your breath is slipping away and you are facing what eternity might be like, you have questions. They call for a pastor. They call for a pastor. I'm going to tell you something. If you are a young adult here, and by young adult, it's always going to be my age and younger. So when I'm your pastor, I'm like 55, I'm going to be like, all you young adults. I mean, we really do think as young adults, we want all the gears in life to work. You get these little windows in life where your income based on your living, so money out, money in, is in good balance, and it feels good. You don't have to worry about money. You get these little tiny windows in life where your relationships are working right. You get these little tiny windows in life where your body is functioning well. You get these little tiny windows in life and you love it. They're exciting. It's fun to be in those little tiny spots in life where everything operates. Now, as a young person, you assume that if you do life right, that window of everything working right is going to be really long. But all the older folks here know that those little pockets of life where everything operates right, like all the little gears are functioning properly, all the older folks know that those windows are actually really small. And you get to land in these little windows where it's not that you're against God, but you don't have to make time for Him because you feel kind of like you got this figured out. But those of us who have lived enough life, those of you, I'm on the young adult side, need to word that differently, right? Those of you who have lived enough life, all of us young adults, we're still figuring it out, right? But all of you who have lived enough life, you know that those windows where everything operates just right are actually really small, and you get little glimpses of them through life. And I often get to be with people when they're crashing out of one of those. I have wept with men and women who have destroyed their marriages because of sin. I have wept with the families who have been destroyed because of somebody else's sin. I've watched people mourn so hard that they're throwing up. I've been able to sit down and look in the eyes of people who have just been informed that they have a terminal disease. And with tears running down their face, they go, why? When I was younger, I was really wrestling with ministry and whether I wanted to do it, go into the ministry, be a part of this system. Because you live in these emotional extremes, it's a really wonderful, difficult job to have. And I remember even as a young man, I asked the question, I'm going, why? Why does it have to be this way? I mean, I just wish things could work better. And my mom, of course, my mom's a great thinker. She's so systematic, brilliant mind. My mom sat me down and she answered my question in a way that I didn't expect. My mom sat me down and she said, Michael, there are 3 ways that we respect people. She said, we respect people because of power. This is like the police officer who pulls you over. I mean, when you get pulled over by a cop and you stop and you're waiting there and he comes over and you roll down your window and you give him your stuff. I mean, you're not sitting there going, oh man, I love the police. They're so wonderful. I'm so grateful that they pull us over. This is such a blessing in the car. You don't think that. You respect them because they have power. You respect them because you have to. You got to treat them right. It's supposed to be the right thing to do. It doesn't mean everybody does, but it's what you're supposed to do. You respect them because they have power. And then there's another level. So that's one way we respect people. Another way that we respect people is through admiration, like from a distance, like a rock star on a stage. You go and you look at a musician, some big, really famous musician, and you don't know them, but you admire them from a distance. Or maybe you're a history guy and you like some of the guys that have gone before us. The way my mom would say it is like presidents of the past. You've read all about them, you've studied them, but you don't know them and they don't really know you. That's another level of respect. Then she said there's a third level of respect that's very different, and it's all based on loving personal relationships. It's like a healthy parent to a child. And with my kids, I mean, even with my children, yes, at this point, I'm still bigger and stronger, so I do have more power over them. And yes, they're young enough that they still kind of admire me, but that's not why our relationships work the way they do primarily. I mean, there's something deeper I want to be there. And it's this loving respect. So my mom walks me through this, and I'm trying to figure out how I put together broken world and this whole idea of respect. How do those marry, Mom? And she says this to me. God so perfectly designed this place that he is not this big monster pseudo cop in the sky staring everyone down, and we all look up and see him, and he's got like the sunglasses on waiting for you to commit that crime or sin, and then he zaps us. I mean, we know that in our day and age some very evil people get lots of power and life works for them. So he's not the super cop. He doesn't want you to follow him just because he has all the power and you're scared of him. He didn't design life that way. He said, Mike, he didn't design life where he was just at a distance, like God set it all in motion and then disappears and says, good luck with it all. No, my mom said, God sent Jesus. And that's the point. That is the point. Jesus didn't show up on this planet with all kinds of power, zapping everybody that got it wrong. He didn't stay the super rich, wealthy, political rock star out of touch by the common people. God as man showed up to personally love us. That is the point. 1 Peter 2, 9 through 10, we need to walk into Peter's train of thought here. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. Now, notice this. But he calls these people out, right? And there's my mom talking to me. I'm wrestling with, what do I want to do? Do I want to go into the ministry? I mean, these extremes of life. I've experienced it a lot, even in the years that I've done this. And my mom says the whole point of this is to let them taste the personal, loving Jesus. Let them taste it. Don't let Jesus stay a distant thing that they study from the past. Don't paint God into this really scary militant cop. Paint Jesus how he's painted in the New Testament. But you are, Peter calls them out, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Isn't it amazing how people always want to go back into the darkness? They taste the light. It's so easy for us to fall asleep again. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. I love the way Cason Holdren states this. All right, I'm going to quote him here. This is really good. I'm going to read through it, then I'll explain it. Peter, Holdren says, is determined to end this doctrinal section on a positive note. He concludes with a review of the status of the believer, verses 9 through 10. Return to the topic of their privileged position in God's temple, using the emphatic "but you" to make the transition and contrast clear. Now, this is a big deal. I know it's kind of deep. I'll explain it in a second. As we note when we read 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10, this privilege, Holdren goes on to say, this privileged position is described by transforming the church, the titles of Israel, by transferring to the church the titles of Israel in the Old Testament. Why is this special status important? Those who believe have a special assignment while here on earth. What is he talking about? In the Old Testament, you have to remember they didn't have the New Testament like we have today. In the New Testament day and age, their scripture would have been the Old Testament. And when they heard the phrase God's people or God's chosen people, it's referring to God's identified people, which are the Israelites. And so this command in this text to these people in this day and age would be saying, those of you that follow Jesus are now God's chosen people. That's huge. That title means a lot. Titles are so powerful. When people call you something, tag you with a name, tall, short, skinny, fat, even people you don't like, it's hard to shake those. I remember being a kid, I was in 8th grade playing basketball, and I broke my nose. Actually, I've broken my nose a few times playing sports, but I broke my nose playing basketball. And in our little country town, my uncle was my doctor. And so you go to the doctor and they stuff your nose full of cotton. That's really about it. And so I get my nose all kind of set straight and I go about my life. And it didn't take but about a week or two, and I was back with my family hanging out, and he's like, that's just a little bit crooked. My nose is crooked. And man, it's amazing because when you're in 8th grade and you get up in the morning and you go to comb your hair, I'm getting ready for school, I look in the mirror and all I can see is my crooked nose. I don't even notice my hair. It's like my clothes. I'm just going, wow, my nose is really crooked. And every time I look at it, I think it's even more crooked than it was before. Like you obsess on it. And all it takes is a few people to say your nose is crooked and you can't get it out of your mind. Isn't that crazy the way that works? Some of you have been so defined by things. Now, the good news was, a few years later, I broke my nose again. Good news, believe it or not. And I went back and it was set by the same doctor, same guy. And this time I went home and I looked in the mirror and I worked really hard to straighten it out and use that. Now, I'm telling you, it just hurts terrible doing that. And so my eyes are watering and you look at it and you're like, I got to get it right. I don't want to live with this. And so now I have one little bump on one side, but I'm mostly straight now thanks to my medical skills. That's how we did it in the country. We don't do plastic surgery. We just re-break it. Right? So I got it mostly straight. It's all good, man. But for some of you, those little titles have stuck with you. You define yourself by them. Somebody once called you dumb or stupid or you're behind or you don't think right or they labeled you with something. And man, that's always hovered over you. Titles and names are really powerful. And the longer we're immersed in those, the easier it is for them to become our identity. So when the scripture gives the followers of Jesus a name and a title, it's a big deal. With titles come responsibility. I can say the word police officer. There's a level of responsibility. I mean, right now, for some reason, it's really popular. Like, we want to record cops and try to find anything that they're off on, and then we make much of it. And I think, boy, we got to follow around the people that are making the recording, see how holy they are. I always find it really interesting, but man, if you carry the title police officer, it's like there's this level of expectation that's on you, or doctor, or pastor. I mean, I could even throw out the phrase lumberjack and something comes to mind. Now, I'm not talking about the hipster downtown lumberjack dressers, right? I'm not talking about guys who have arms this big, right? These are real lumberjacks that can't fit in skinny jeans, right? They have actual muscles. They chop down trees. Real lumberjacks. When I say lumberjack, something comes to mind. The guys on TV, that's who I'm talking about, right? When I say that title, there's an image that pops in your head. Fireman, professor, dad, mom. With title comes responsibility. The phrase God's people would have implied, both in this text and contextually leading up to this, that these are the new Israelites. These are the new God's people. This title means their job is to make God, now that's Jesus, God manifested, make Jesus famous. Their purpose, their identity, their mission is to usher into this world the ways and nature and truth of Jesus Christ. 1 Peter 2, 6 through 8. Let's continue through this. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. I love the way Charles Spurgeon says this. All right, now, I'm just warning you. Anytime I read one of these deep quotes, and I like the dead guys, I love the dead authors. They're my favorites. So you got to really think as I read this to you, but I will go back and address it a bit, okay? So this is Spurgeon. This is great. In the old birth, now he's talking about physical birth, like a baby being born. In the old birth and in the new birth, now he's talking about life, like when you accept Christ into your heart, when you become a Christian. When he says old birth, he's talking about a baby. When he says new birth, he's talking about us as Christians being born again. In the old birth and in the new birth, a life is also brought forth, which is complete in all its parts and only needs to be developed. Spurgeon goes on to say, yon infant in the cradle shall never have another limb or another eye. Its limb hardens, it grows, it gathers strength. Its brain also enlarges in sphere, but the faculties are there already. Now this is brilliant. Listen to this. They are not implanted afterwards. Verily, so is it in the newborn child of God. Faith, love, hope, every grace, and there are the moment the new believer receives Christ. They grow, 'tis true, but they were all there in the instant of regeneration. The babe in grace, who is just now born to God, hath every part of the spiritual man. It only needs to grow till he becomes a perfect man in Christ. When you become a Christian, the faculties are there already. I mean, it's like when you accept Christ into your heart, you get that little taste of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, the fruit of the Spirit. When you accept Christ, you have those glimpses of hope that are so life-transforming when you accept Christ into your heart. But Spurgeon's right, they need to be worked out and grown. It's almost like we believe, it's actually Kathy that pointed this out when we were talking about it, it's almost like we believe that if we were to go to the gym and get a gym membership, just having the card puts us in great shape. Now the gym membership means you can go into the gym, but you have yet to work out and actually get in good shape. That's just begun. The journey's just started. And with spiritual things, it's the same way. You are called to work out towards the title that God has given you. You are called to work towards that title, to continue to work out what it means to be faithful, work out what it means to have hope and to birth that in your home, work out what it means to share your faith. You practice it, you work it out, you work towards the title that God has given you. I'm going to invite Josh up and we're going to be done in just a moment. So there was a young man wrestling with my called ministry. And I had finished my exercise science, and I was coming near the end of my degree in philosophy and religion. And I went through a season where I was just really anxious and depressed. And it was really hard for me to pin down why. The truth is, I was maybe a little afraid. What if I wasn't going to do the ministry well? I was engaged to Leslie at the time. And I kept thinking in my mind, man, is this really right? Is it the right person? I mean, I know she's right, but am I the right person? I mean, what if I mess this up? I hope this goes okay. And then you start thinking, is there something wrong with me? And then you think, if there is something wrong with me, you know how your mind just goes? If you haven't had that happen yet in life, I promise it's going to at some point. And so I go and I talk to my mom and I go, Mom, why do things have to be the way they are? I just want God to make me new. I want Him to make me right. I don't like having these cogs. We get these little windows where everything works right. And when one of those cogs breaks, we want God to fix it so everything in life operates right. And I said the same thing to my mom that I have now heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in 15 years of doing this. Pastor Mike, for me it was my mom, going, Mom, just pray, Dad, pray that God would just make me new and make things right. I don't want to mess this up. I hope this is really what He's calling me to do. I'm nervous. I'm kind of anxious about it all. I don't know. And my mom looks at me, and in her own words, she basically says, that's the point. That is the point. Billions of people through history, so many fairy tales told from Robin Hood to Cinderella are all a picture of humanity deeply longing for things to be made new and made right. All of human history is littered with these story after story after story, fairy tale after fairy tale, all asking, longing for the same thing. It's the hunger inside of us, and we know things aren't right, and we want to be made new, and we want things made right. Every time you read a hate blog, every time you get online and you look at people are afraid of being mistreated or human rights activism, whatever it is that you're looking, you're seeing people desperately wanting things to be made right. And that's the point. And my mom looks at me and she said this so good. I don't know how He'll make now, but you can speak to the human hunger. And that's the point. And I'm telling you today, you can speak to the human hunger. Billions, all of human history, longing to be made new and things to be made right. We don't even know what right is anymore, but we have a hunger for it. We have a hunger in us that nothing in this world can satisfy, and it's baked into all of us. Even atheists who write about how messed up things are want things to be made right. And that hunger in them is the point. That is the point. My mom is right. That brilliant counselor is right. And then you read through this text, and he defines who you are as a royal priesthood called out of darkness. And he has allowed you as Christians to get a glimpse of hope. And he asks you to then share that hope with the world and to work towards your identity. That's the point. That's the point. I once had a guy tell me that Christianity was just another fairy tale, and he said it in a condescending way. The story of Jesus is just another fairy tale, and they all say the same thing. The world is broken, and some people have become really cynical, but we're all hoping that whether it's Robin Hood, the king will return, whether it's Cinderella, the prince is going to save us, whether it's the story of Jesus, it's all saying the same thing. And he said it in a condescending way, and I couldn't help but giggle. Because as he was saying it, I thought, that's the point. That's the point. All of humanity, all those stories are hungry for something that this world can't offer. And I'm willing to raise my hand and say, I don't want to become the cynical, angry person hiding in the dark. I want to acknowledge that billions all through history have had this hunger. And I want to seek out an answer to it. Because you are hungry for something that is not found on this planet. That's why you're here. So then it's fun to switch gears and talk about the history, the proofs of God, whether it's classics, theological, ontological, all that fun stuff, to look at the person of Christ through history. Look at historians like Josephus and that have written about Jesus that weren't even in Christian literature or even Christians. And go, at least with my fairy tale, there's much evidence. But the hunger is in you. What are you going to do about it?